It's a pleasure to be the last speaker of the day for a couple of reasons. One is, as Helen said, this is the only slide you get from me, so I hope you enjoy it. You get to stare at me for the next 35 minutes or so. And after me, stay tuned for drinks, right? Usually my presentations go a lot better with drinks, but we'll make this do. I've done a couple of these events before for RICS. A couple of years ago, I did one in Washington, and part of my discussion was going to be about blockchain. And I asked Neil Shaw, if you happen to know him from RICS in America, if I could do it by getting members of the audience to form a conga line to do it. And he said, nope, that's not going to work with this crowd. So we're not going to do that. We are going to talk about some really cool things going on in the technology space, but I'm also going to be a bit of a devil's advocate. I love technology. I've grown up with technology. I'm an engineer by trade. I've worked on some really, really cool things. And in the same way that I camped out for Van Halen tickets in 1979, I camped out about 11 years ago for the device that really revolutionized what's going on in the technology space. And that was the Apple iPhone. And this morning we had such a great presentation that hopefully I'll be able to bookend off the back of that. That phone really did a lot, but there was also a comment that was made that I thought was really, really important. When Apple introduced the iPhone, it wasn't the first smartphone that had ever come out. Many people over here had Nokia devices, had Ericsson devices. We had devices that could actually download applications and do some interesting things. But what made the iPhone exceptionally powerful on day one was a business model that was bolted onto it in the United States. That was the first time a network operator, AT&T, introduced the all-you-can-eat business model that said, forget about worrying about how much data, just use this thing as much as you want. And so that's what we did. And if you think about that first generation iPhone that came out, it was actually a pretty lousy device. Didn't have third generation cellular in it. The camera was a POS. Couldn't even do picture messaging on that first device. But then a couple of years later, they introduced the App Store. And man, it just took off. Bored? Need a game? Download it. Need a recipe for dinner? Off you go. We had the ability to cater this device to every single whim that we had, and we were really off to the races. We embraced this device like there was no tomorrow, and the love of technology was on. In the same way that we fell in love with the internet, we fell in love with this device and what it could do and how we could personalize it for an experience that mattered to us. But here we are in 2018, and it's interesting to me because I'm actually starting to see, for the first time in a long time, a backlash against technology. And that backlash is real, and it's evident to us. People that are on Facebook, and I gave up that god-awful platform 11 years ago myself, so you won't find me there. But look what's happened with Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Your data has been used in ways you couldn't imagine. All the really cool things that are going on in the artificial intelligence space, we're now starting to have a proper debate about whether the use of all this data is actually good for us. We actually rate ourselves on how many likes did we get on a Facebook post or an Instagram post, and we make judgments about ourselves on the basis of that. And our kids are like this all the time. Hallie, what are you doing? Can you look at me? Right? We've gotten so wrapped up into these devices. So I'm not going to sit here and pick on this stuff, but I think it's appropriate for us to start having the debate about what technology brings. Because at the end of the day, technology can do a lot of good, but technology can also create issues for us that we need to think about. And again, this morning we talked about autonomous cars. Autonomous cars is a great example. I mean, I sit there and think about it and go, right, we could totally eliminate the whole issue around drink driving. Because we could go off to the pub, hop in our autonomous car, and it takes us home. But how's that going to work if you're a lorry driver here in the UK? and suddenly your job gets taken away from you. Or as Walter pointed out and as we heard this morning, the number of jobs that are going to be automated completely away. Why? Because the machines are going to do so much of this for us. But what I don't want you to think is that the machines are going to do this tomorrow. Elon Musk, when he talks about these machines like becoming our overlords and suddenly it's a bad Doctor Who episode that we're living through, that's not really what's going to happen. Because if you look at what this whole sphere of artificial intelligence is about, it's a set of technologies that are actually coming together that are either very specialized or very wide. So the machines are really, really good at doing things like reading Wikipedia. And if you've ever seen the whole IBM Watson and Jeopardy episode in the United States, that thing kicked butt because it was really good at reading Wikipedia. But machines aren't so good when it comes to specialties. And in fact, artificial intelligence is actually comprised of 3 technologies that have to all come together. Machines first have to learn, just like we do as people, and we call that machine learning. We train machines to understand patterns of data, to understand taxonomy of language. And that language is specific to how a lawyer speaks, or a financial professional, or you in the property business. Once machines learn, then they can start to apply networks, information where they start talking to other machines, and that's where the intelligence actually starts to come in. Think about it when we started to go through school. Just because we learned something doesn't mean we actually know anything. And so we have these deep neural networks that can start to learn and start to act like a human brain, but machines need to talk to machines to actually be able to answer questions, just like we have to ask questions when we don't know the answer. And then most importantly, when we're starting to think about a lot of the new technologies that are coming out today, one of the most critical things we have to think about is the human-computer interface. I work on a lot of really, really awesome technologies. I've had artificial intelligence and blockchain and digital identity that you see up here, and cloud computing and all this stuff, and it all sounds really, really cool. But if I can't make that experience meaningful to you, it's completely useless. And so bringing together all of these capabilities and all these services, as we talked about this morning, the thing that makes Siri or the Amazon Echo or the Google Home device so powerful is that we've been able to make it very simple for people to use. You just ask it a question and it answers, just like a human being. So it's this constellation of technologies in the artificial intelligence space that all have to come together. Now, part of the problem, too, that we have in the artificial intelligence space to think about, and it's been touched on a little bit here and there, are things like bias and ethics. This is a huge problem that we have to think about. When we design a lot of these systems, they're a lot like your investment planning and the way that works today, where you go and you talk to a wealth management professional, and that wealth management professional invests your money and stuff, and you're hoping to God that some kind of great return comes out off the basis of that. And the machines have gotten really, really good at investing our money and playing the game in such a way that we get a return on our investments. But a lot of these machines are black boxes. And black boxes are a huge problem because one day you have a balanced portfolio, the next day you're fully invested in cheese futures, and you're asking yourself, what happened here? Where's that balanced portfolio that I once had? So having to think about the black box and what we design into that black box is hugely important to go and to solve. But this ethics question is one that isn't going to go away. That's the problem that we always talk about with respect to the autonomous car, right? The autonomous car has to make a decision. Do I hit that group of 4 people over there or that one person over there? And what's the right answer? Well, off the top of our head, we go, we'll kill 1 instead of 4. Well, it could be that that one person over there has the right bone marrow to save the life of the President of the United States? Well, maybe we would go ahead. I gotta get a laugh sooner or later, right? But that's part of the ethics that we have to think through with respect to how these artificial intelligence systems actually work. So the good thing is that for the first time, I see us having this discussion with respect to technology. Just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. And we should air this in a public forum, and we should have this discussion and debate so that we don't send ourselves down a path that we can't recover from. Now let's talk about one of the most interesting technology areas that I think everybody in this room should pay attention to over the coming years, and that's the space that I happen to work in now, identity. Identity is something that each of us can personally relate to, because so many of us have been a victim of identity theft, or we know somebody who has. Or if you're lucky enough to be based in the United States, you've already had Equifax ruin your life for the rest of time, with 160 million people who have had their data breached. But identity is a very, very complicated topic because when you think about it, it means different things to different people. And in fact, when you think about the challenge of identity, people themselves are a complicated thing, so much so that we actually wrap identity into 4 facets when we're speaking about the notion of identity of an individual. There's the essence of who we are as people. And that's not me going off and having some Colorado Rocky Mountain high, but that's this discussion around how we are comprised as humans, our DNA, our biometrics, fingerprints, how we look, how we talk, the way that you can tell it's me versus Walter versus Helen up here on stage. But for the most part, we don't actually spit on a stick when we conduct a transaction. Instead, we use legal documents, and this forms the second facet of our identity. These facets include things like our passport, our driver's license, our birth certificates, these proxies that are great representatives of us and yet can be forged. In fact, Interpol estimates that 40 million passports are currently sitting in the wild, having been lost or stolen since 2002. These are all documents that can be used against us to establish identity. And obviously, I'll come on to why this is important. The third facet of identity when it comes to people are these self-declarations that we make in 2018. My email address, my Twitter handle, my Facebook profile, if I was nuts enough to be on Facebook, right? These are assertions that we make, but by Facebook's own admission. Here's another scary data point for you. They have about 2 billion profiles currently today in their network. By their own admission, somewhere between 5 and 15% of those profiles are bogus. That could mean that up to 300 million profiles sitting on Facebook today are absolute rubbish, and we're relying on that. And it's not much different if you're looking over on Twitter. On Twitter, you might see sometimes this little verified blue check that somebody has next to their name. That means they are verified. Well, go read Twitter's terms of service and see if you can explain to me what verified means. Is it me? Is it my social media handler? Is it the cook? Is it the maid? Is it my brother? You don't actually know. All you know is that Twitter's done something to say that that account actually represents the individual or the business or the entity being presented in the social media space. So it's a pretty weak indicator, these self-described electronic declarations of ourselves. And then finally, we get to the fourth facet, which is probably the coolest of the cool, and that's the behavioral component that defines us as individuals. And we understand this from how we spend money on our credit cards. You might have been overseas at some time, plunked your credit card down, wanted to buy something, card declined. What happened? The bank has looked at your spending patterns and for whatever reason decided that you haven't been to France in 20 years, you've never bought cigars in your life, so the likelihood that that transaction taking place at 2 a.m. is probably not valid, and it gets shut down. But it's even more powerful than that, and you don't even know it. For every one of you, as you have a mobile device, each of these devices has a tremendous number of sensors within the device. These sensors can detect, is it actually you holding the phone? Is it actually you entering the PIN code? And so if Walter happens to get access to my phone and actually knows my PIN code, the device can detect, that doesn't look like Bob. That's not where Bob taps the keyboard. That's not the pressure that Bob happens to use. So maybe it's not him, and maybe we're not going to unlock the phone because we don't think it's him. So in trying to solve this problem of identity for people, we've got to bring together all these components at once. And why is this important? One of the biggest challenges that your industry faces, that I see across the financial services sector, that I see pretty much everywhere in the world, is this issue of fraud, and specifically what we call synthetic identity fraud. This is where people grab identity attributes that are valid, and they do things here in the UK like changing their name by deed poll, and then they represent themselves as the owner of a property, combined with some other attributes that they bring together, and they commit a fraudulent transaction. And we're seeing this in the US with kids that are under the age of 18 who don't have established credit profiles yet. So the bad guy will get a US Social Security number, maybe a name, maybe an address from 3 different places, and stitch that together. And they'll go and apply for credit. And because that person hasn't showed up within the credit system, guess what happens? First time through, they'll get rejected. But that credit profile has been established. And the banks, being as stupid as they are and as greedy as they are sometimes, somebody will continue to apply with that synthetic identity, and ultimately, they will get a credit card, because that's the way the system works. Now, the bad guys are really smart. They've figured this out. And so what do the bad guys do? Well, they pay the credit card bill on time. And they pay the credit card bill on time again next month and the month after that. Why? Because if you pay your credit card bill on time, guess what happens? You get more credit. You get your credit limit raised. You can apply for more cards. And so they'll spend 18 to 24 months to build out this fraudulent profile and cash in 2 years down the line, all in. And at that point, your child's credit is completely screwed. So solving the problem of identity for people is a really, really complicated problem, but it's also a problem that we have to tackle because each one of us is affected. And if you think it's tough for us, think about the fact that there are 1.5 billion people on this planet who have no legal identity to speak of whatsoever. These are the people who are faceless, nameless, often trafficked, working in mines under child labor, things that we don't even think about today. And so that's where the second piece of the problem that we can solve in identity is something that is very, very relevant to this industry. And that's when we start talking about the identity of things. The identity of things is a problem that we want to try to solve because we want to be able to understand the provenance of goods. Where did that gold that's sitting in your iPhone come from? Was it mined ethically? Did it use appropriate types of labor? Were the people that worked in that mine treated fairly, treated nicely, treated appropriately as human beings? And we're starting to see this capability come out today now, where we're actually creating the provenance of materials. And there's a couple of really good startups, one based here in the UK, actually 2 based here in the UK, although one's led by an Aussie. We won't talk about that. She's really cool, though, looking at diamonds and tracing diamonds as they come out of the mine and attaching them to blockchain-based technology to create transparency and to create immutability about where that rock came from and how it made it from the mine to a person's hand. This is something that we can not only do with things like fish, diamonds, etc., and the materials that go into the things that we consume and we use, but it can also be used for property. There are a lot of places around the world where we don't have the ability to actually document who is a landholder. And so one day you're tilling your land, life seems great, and the next day somebody shows up with a piece of paper. And it says, you're no longer the owner of this land. And that person has no recourse whatsoever because nothing has been put into a proper register. Nothing has been tracked in terms of ownership and ongoing sales. So creating identity around parcels of land, creating identity around the transactions, who the buyer is, who the seller is, understanding who the people are that are involved in this, and getting the appropriate parties engaged in the verification of that process can solve a lot of problems with respect to not just the identity of people, but the identity of things. So I want to leave you with this today, if nothing else, and then we'll go into some questions before we do some drinks. Don't get me wrong, I love technology. There is a lot of very, very cool technology out there today that has absolutely transformed the way new businesses can arise. Things like cloud computing enable us to no longer have to put the servers in our offices, but rather let Amazon and Microsoft and other companies that are going to spend the money on security stand these things for us and run them and operate them 24/7 so that we don't have to think about that. There's no question that artificial intelligence is going to be a massive impact across every single industry. Yours, financial services, baseball, you name it. Artificial intelligence is going to automate so many roles, and it's going to change the game. But as we apply artificial intelligence, we need to do it on the basis of creating the transparency around how the engines are built and put into our minds the ethics of what we're actually creating so that we don't build things that create a terrible tomorrow. And then last but not least, when it comes to solving some of the biggest challenges on a go-forward basis, the issue of solving for identity is one that's going to impact every single one of us. It's going to impact us in our business life, and it's going to impact us in a personal way. We need to do a better job of managing the way identity is verified and the way ongoing transactions are conducted so that we're not oversharing too much information when we conduct this transaction, but just enough and just that which is appropriate. And last but not least, we need to be thinking about the identity of things, not just people. Where did those minerals come from? Where did we source our products from? Did they come from places that are ethically responsible, that treat the workers like human beings with dignity that they respect? So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon and look forward to answering any of the questions you might have in any technology space. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.